Sounding the alarm for the developing world, fighting aid fatigue with concerted action. Not easy in a time of severe austerity. Hello, I'm Chris Burns, and welcome to People First, the EPP Group's monthly program on issues with impact on people like you. On this edition, in this season's Spirit of Giving, we take a closer look at development aid, with Europe being the world's biggest donor, more than 50 billion euros in assistance a year. That's more than half the total worldwide. How to continue financing development in a time of tough fiscal constraints on EU member states, and how to better target financing to promote democracy and human rights worldwide after uprisings swept autocrats from power. Joining us to discuss the issues is Gay Mitchell, an Irish member of Parliament and also a member of the Development Committee here in Parliament and the spokesman for the EPP Group's development issues. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Before we get to that, let's ask you about that presidential campaign. That was pretty tough back there in Ireland. How is it to be back here in the Parliament?
Well, the campaign was very long. I was about a month campaigning for the nomination and about 4 months campaigning for the presidency. Very difficult campaign, 7 candidates. So I'm glad that the decision has been made. We have a president, and I'm glad to be back here full-time at work. I've a lot of work to do.
Back on the ground running, and let's begin with this issue on development aid with the question of the public sentiment and the voter sentiment, the public sentiment. Let's see how it's gauged. Europeans, how they feel about development aid, and it could be surprising to some viewers how it is.
A new Eurobarometer survey says 84% of respondents support development aid as a way to help pull people out of poverty. 62% are in favor of increasing development aid to at least 0.7% of gross national income, one of the Millennium Goals for 2015. The survey also found half of EU citizens are ready to pay more for products, such as so-called fair trade goods, that support farmers and workers in the developing world. But many also want their tax money spent more wisely. 42% believe aid can be more effective by working more closely with the developing countries. The survey was released shortly after the European Commission presented its agenda for change of EU development policy through more targeted allocation of aid funding.
And let's go to our first Vox Pop question that seems to reflect that public sentiment.
Hello, I'm Anna from Bulgaria, and I'm asking how can Europe do more to help the third world?
Mr. Mitchell, aid from the EU is very large by any measure, but is it really enough, as she's asking?
No, it's not enough. If it were enough, we wouldn't be committed to increasing it to 0.7 of 1% of our GNI, our gross national income.
Which is the Millennium Goal for 2015.
It is, and we keep falling back on that. Now, I can understand that economies are in a difficult situation and that wealth falls back in some countries, but we're not asking for other than a percentage of that wealth. And I've been arguing with our EU Commissioner for Communications, for example, but they're always saying, how can we lead people? Here is an area where people are waiting to be led. And on the other side of the coin, it's also in Europe's interest to do this. And perhaps we get an opportunity to explore that.
Very good. Now, you've just secured a piece of legislation that has to do with improving how Europe divvies out its development aid, and you were rapporteur on that. Let's take a look at a report on that.
The legislation is an important step. It strengthens the Parliament's role in strategic decisions on where development aid is spent. Those co-decision powers are granted under the Lisbon Treaty. The report builds on a measure on EU development financing that Mr. Mitchell authored during the last legislature. It merged 14 regulations into one, known as the Umbrella Regulation. It is now the basic law on which EU development aid and policy are based. The legislation can have far-reaching effects. The European Union and its member states provided more than 53 billion euros to more than 150 countries in 2010, with the Commission managing 11 billion of that.
That does seem like a lot of money in itself, but let's take a look at a Vox Pop question on that, see what the public thinks.
I'm Nicholas from France, and I'm asking how much the European aid has an impact on the third world countries.
So, Mr. Mitchell, they're asking about impact. Where is this money going? How much effect is it having in the world? Can you mention a specific example of that?
Well, let's look at impact. 36,000 children per day were dying in the developing world. That is down now to less than 21,000 children per day but it's 21,000 children per day, every day. It's a shocking figure. But we must realise there are 13 or 14,000 children per day living because of aid being directed in the way that it is being directed. And in the Development Cooperation Instrument, the regulation for which I was rapporteur, which you mentioned, we targeted 20% of our aid at health, basic health, and 20% at basic education. That was the first time that was done, and we made that a prerequisite to an agreement with the Commission and Council, and we're now in the process of monitoring was that impacted. So it shows what can be done.
And let's go back to that issue you were talking about, how it is in Europe's interest to do this. Why is that?
Well, by 2050, the population of Europe will have, the population of the world will have increased by 2 billion people, from 6-point-odd billion to 8-point-odd billion. 90% of those will be born into what is now the developing world. If we allow the developing world to continue to exist as it exists, we will have massive migration from south to north, with all the implications of that. If, on the other hand, we invest in those countries and we help them to build up their own countries, and people in those regions are well capable of doing this. You see young kids now with mobile phones who can do more with a mobile phone in Africa than I can do with my mobile phone here in Europe.
Right.
They're smart people. We can make them our trading partners. Now that's smart politics. So for altruistic reasons and for selfish reasons, this has to be high on our agenda.
And I think also it's also in our interest to try to help steer development aid when it comes to some of these new governments brought forth by Arab Spring, by other social upheavals, and the EPP Group has been active in the Parliament to do that. Let's take a look at this report on that.
Another recent piece of legislation promotes democracy and human rights through allocation of development aid. The measure fine-tunes a system that directs aid to fight poverty, addresses the population's essential needs like primary education and health, and promotes social cohesion and employment. Also of high importance, promoting governance, democracy, and human rights. Withholding aid can be as powerful as giving it out, especially in trying to leverage pro-democracy forces, as we've seen in other new governments.
And we also have a Vox Pop question on that. Let's see what the public's thinking about it.
Hello, my name is Piotr Rozalski. I've got a question regarding development aids. Actually, how Europe could enforce the human rights in the developing countries that receive European aid.
So, Mr. Mitchell, it's delicate, isn't it? Trying to decide whether to support a government, to what amount of money, and how.
In Europe, we do attach conditions: human rights, good governance. Now, we have to be careful that we don't impose European standards on other countries.
There's that grey area there.
There is a grey area. I attended the first ASEAN meeting with John Bruton as Taoiseach when I was Minister for European Affairs, and we had the presidency of the European Union. And they said to us, fine, talk to us about human rights, but do not impose your standards on us. They, for example, abhor some of what they see as the standards we live in. They have a different view of family. They have a different view of sexuality. They have a different view of solidarity. And they're not impressed with what they see in the North. So they don't want us to lecture them. But at the same time, we cannot be giving funds to regimes that abuse their own citizens or that do not live by international norms.
So there are certain limits to that.
Yes, there are, and we have to try and jolly that along. But unlike any other region, the European Union has a parliament, has a full assembly, the African, Caribbean, Pacific EU Assembly, where those 78 member states with 78 MEPs or up to 78 MEPs meet with commissioners and councils present, and we don't tell them what to do, we discuss and we try to get agreement on what to do. And I think that is the difference. No other region in the world, there is no US Congress ACP assembly, for example. So that's a most unusual approach to it, and a bit of the stick, a bit of the carrot, a lot of persuasion, but also we have to learn.
Right. Mr. Mitchell, thank you very much for joining us on this program. That's it for now on People First. Find out more about the activities of the largest political group in the Parliament by checking eppgroup.eu. Until next time, thanks for watching.